We got crucified. As a matter of fact, the Sinai Bible, Jesus was crucified. Well, that doesn't exist in the Sinai Bible. The Sinai Bible. The Sinai Bible. But then you go to the Sinai Bible. In the Sinai Bible. And the Sinai Bible. According to the Sinai Bible, Jesus wasn't crucified in that Bible.
Hey YouTube world, Harvest is Plenty. Thanks for stopping by to check out the video. So I have a good one for you guys today. Ole Billy Carson. He's been a very busy bee, bouncing around from podcast to podcast, doing what he normally does. Bashing Christianity, bashing Jesus Christ, bashing the Bible, and deceiving people, saying things like God is just a frequency, saying things like there's no second coming of Jesus Christ, it's just the second coming of the Christ consciousness, where everybody can become gods. That's the same lie that the serpent told Adam and Eve in the garden in the book of Genesis, that if you eat off the tree of good and evil, your eyes will be opened and you will become gods. That's that Luciferian philosophy. You know, one thing that Billy doesn't tell his audience when he goes on these podcasts, he doesn't say, hey guys, I'm a Freemason, I believe in the Luciferian philosophy, Lucifer is my God, and the information I'm getting ready to share with you is basically Babylonian and Egyptian mystery religious stuff and other things that I learned as I ascended up the ladder in Freemasonry. He doesn't say that. He deceives people and he lies. He's a fraudster, you know, and nobody never fact check him. Well, that's not really true. A couple people have come out and they've put in videos on their channel about Billy Carson. I did the same thing as well, and I'll link those below. We fact checked them on the little things. But Billy has never sat across a Christian who knows their stuff and talked all that new age mumbo jumbo to them, you know, and there's a cross-examination of his beliefs until today. His number's up. He sat down with a gentleman by the name of Wes Huff, and Wes pulled his card, so much so that when the debate was over, Billy went into full meltdown mode. Got his legal team and his lawyers involved. They're threatening lawsuits. They don't want this interview or this debate to see the light of day. A few people have gotten a hold of the interview and they put it up, and it immediately got taken down. Billy has his lawyers, they're on a task. They want to get this thing down because this is a possibly career ender for him. Well, fortunately for me and for you, I was able to get a hold of it and I'm going to put it up. But I have to put it up piece by piece. That's the only way I think I can avoid a copyright strike and getting my channel suspended. So I'm going to put it up. I'm going to risk it. So please be patient with me as I interject to put into my own commentary, because I believe if I have my own commentary, I could avoid a copyright strike. So that's the only reason why I will be cutting in and cutting out with little comments. That's all. Please be patient with me. But let's get into Wes Huff and the background of how Billy ended up in a debate with him.
And that was his reasoning for why they wanted to take it down. Is that more or less what your understanding of the situation is?
I think so. That's kind of what's been reported. Is I had this interaction with Billy. Mark knows Billy personally, has known him for years. Their families go on vacation together. And Mark is, as you said, I think a recent believer, but and knew of the differences between him and Billy's worldview. But I don't think until this particular interaction realized the depths of the disagreement and the real issues that lay at the heart of what Billy believes compared to what Mark is just kind of figuring out in his own faith journey.
Man, I mean, how cool is it that Mark's around Billy? Like that's really cool. And I'm impressed that they're friends and that he's willing to challenge him and push back. And so he is like, hey, I know this guy, Wes. He's a gentleman, a scholar, connoisseur of all fine things, and he knows a bit of history, and decided to work you into the conversation. So for folks who don't know you, give us a little bit of your credentials in this entire space and why Mark decided to work you into the debate with Billy Carson.
Yeah, so I've devoted my life to understanding, researching, and communicating the history of the text of the Bible. So I'm currently finishing up my PhD at the University of Toronto in New Testament studies. But what I look at is I look at manuscripts of the early New Testament text and other adjacent Christian literature between the 2nd and 3rd centuries. So I am looking at the manuscripts. I'm comparing them to other ancient Greco-Roman literature and even some other comparative religious stuff from the ancient Near East and the Greco-Roman world. And so I've been posting about that kind of stuff where I work. I'm a a director at Apologetics Canada up here in Canada. I live in Toronto. And we've been producing a series called Can I Trust the Bible? Where last summer, my colleague and I flew out to Egypt and we produced 2 episodes of that talking about Gnostic literature and why that's not in our Bible, why the Gospel of Thomas is not included in your Gospels, and why Matthew, Mark, and John are. And so
are you listening, Alex O'Connor? Are you listening? Why the Gospel of Thomas is not in there?
So one of the things we really wanted to do is we wanted to go to Nag Hammadi. We wanted to go where the Gospel of Thomas was discovered. And then we went to the Cairo Museum and we got permission to see the Gospel of Thomas. And so I stood in front of the Gospel of Thomas. I translated the Coptic. And then in this series, my colleague and I, Andy, talked about, why the Gnostic Gospel of Thomas is excluded from the canon of Scripture. So we talked about that. The first episode is called The Right Books, and the second episode is called The Right Text, where we go into a little bit more of what's sometimes referred to as textual criticism. But I was posting this stuff, and one of an individual on Mark's media team was following me and kind of following some of the content I had, and Mark had verbalized that he was going to get Billy in the studio, and he wanted to interact with some of their differences, but just felt unprepared, felt inadequate. Billy's throwing around all these terms and talking about tablets and scrolls and Sumerian and Greek. And Mark just said, I can't go on the same kind of playing field. Who do we know that could? And so luckily someone on his media team reached out to me and said, hey, this is happening in 24 hours, but if you're willing to, we'd love for you to interact with Billy Carson on some of this stuff.
All right. So we got some background underneath our belt. Let's jump right into it, and I'll be back with some commentary. That's the only way I know how to keep this video from receiving a copyright strike, is by putting my commentary into the video as well. So let's jump into it.
But so Wes, now that we got you on, Wesley Huff, historian, linguist, biblical scholar, PhD, and athlete wannabe. I like how you threw that in the bio right there. And Wesley, my man, I think it would be great to, I know you guys were both recently in Egypt. There's tons that I'm interested in that. How all these things show up in Egypt is baffling to me. But just going right to it, I had here, Billy, you talk about how Jesus was never crucified, which is interesting because my wife, who's a Muslim, they believe that as well. Their beliefs, from what I understand from her, are they don't think that Jesus, as they believe is a prophet, God would have him killed. But I don't think they have any historical evidence, as far as I know, as to what or how or why they believe that. I'm curious for you guys both, and if you want to, I guess, go first, Billy, as to how you came about, like the findings where it seems that Jesus was not crucified, or that's not accurate.
Sure. And in my videos, and if you listen to the podcast, the statement is according to the Sinai Bible. Okay, according to the Sinai Bible, Jesus wasn't crucified in that Bible. And that Bible predates the King James Version of the Bible, and the text there actually is about 12 to 14,000 differences between the Sinai Bible and the King James Version of the Bible, which came much later. And then also one of the things that were interesting is that they discovered the book of Jesus' wife, which is at the Harvard Seminary, which according to some scholars, is a little controversial, but they claim that this is an accurate record that Jesus may have even been married, which then, adds more, if that's true, it adds more to the hypothesis that maybe he wasn't crucified. I just personally believe that Jesus was an amazing human being. I don't think that he was the Son of God in the sense that he's God, but that we're all gods. As he said, ye are gods, and that we're to do greater things in him. And I just personally believe that the return of the Christ is the return of the Christ consciousness. When we can all achieve a certain level of knowledge, wisdom, passion, understanding, empathy, love that he came to this planet with, and we get that in our mind and our consciousness, and we can act on those incredible emotions and that understanding, that the whole world is going to transform instantaneously. And I think that the second coming is the coming of the Christ consciousness to the planet, not a human being flying back to Earth to save people. That's just my personal understanding of how I've perceived it over many, many years of going through this information and going through all this text.
And Wes, I'm gonna let you respond to that. And again, I mean, this is everyone listening to the show. You know, I'm always like, challenge everything. Learn to critically think and continue to come to your conclusions. Even with Jesus, I'm not personally even waiting on that he has to come back to say, I already know I'm, like I said, that strength of God and consciousness is already, I can tap into that right now. So you don't have to wait for him to come back. For those that believe he does, to actually have that like next level of what that's supposed to mean. But Wes, go ahead on for what Billy was talking about, I think with a book in the Harvard Museum, and I heard something about Jesus's wife, which that's, yeah.
Now that's funny. You see, there's no such thing as a Sinai Bible. That's what I was telling you guys. Nobody fact checks Billy. Billy just says a million things, and he uses big words, and he speaks matter of factly, and nobody facts check him. Gotta fact check Billy, Freemason Billy. Now there's something called the Codex Vaticanus and the Codex Sinaiticus. These are manuscripts from the Alexandrian Egypt line. And then there's something called the Byzantine manuscript, and that's where the King James Bible comes from. The Textus Receptus comes from the Byzantine, and other books, other biblical books or other Bibles, when they translate them, the Greek part, it comes from either the Codex Vaticanus or the Codex Sinaiticus. Billy doesn't know what he's talking about. But anyway, let's continue.
Yeah, well, first let me say I think it's really cool to not just be in the room proverbially with you, Billy, but be able to interact with you. Because I wish I could be there in person. Unfortunately, Toronto, Canada, is a long way away from Florida. It's a little bit of a jaunt. But I really appreciate the fact that you seem to have investigated to a certain degree some of these facts. Do you mind if I ask a clarifying question?
Sure.
When you say the Sinai Bible, what are you referring to specifically?
It's the biblical text that was written. It made it into you can actually look it up on Amazon. It's a Bible called, I have a version at home. It's called the Sinai Bible, right, from Mount Sinai. I'm assuming that's the mountain that they're referencing there. But they put together their own version of the biblical text prior to the King James Version being put out.
Sure. So when you refer to the Sinai Bible, would you be referring to Codex Sinaiticus, like the codex that comes? Okay. That's why I was trying to get some clarification, because so you can actually go and see Codex Sinaiticus is at the British Library. So you can go and see it. It's on display. And the British Library has actually digitized the entire manuscript. So I work with manuscripts in my linguistic work. I'm an expert on early Christian scribal culture, and particularly in Greek and Coptic manuscripts. I actually have a facsimile. So I have a photocopy that was done by the British Library of Codex Sinaiticus that I work with in my office. So I have it here. And the only reason I asked for clarification is because I want to make sure that what I'm addressing is actually what you mean.
Gotcha.
And not addressing something else. Because the Codex Sinaiticus in particular is just it's a 4th century Greek manuscript.
Mm-hmm.
It comes from approximately between 325 and 350 AD. And its text of the Gospels reads almost identical to the modern Greek text that we develop translations from. So my curiosity is just simply in kind of exploring, when you say that it denies the crucifixion or that the crucifixion isn't there. I mean, I can go on right now, Codex Sinaiticus, and I can look up the end of, say, Matthew 27, where it has Jesus being crucified. Yeah. And that's in Codex Sinaiticus, or, the John 19, or any of the other ones. So I think my confusion is that it doesn't read any differently. So actually, are you able to pull up a website? Would the like
Yeah, I'm
viewers or
looking for
listeners or
I'm
whatever be
looking
able to
for
see
it
that?
right now to make sure I have
What
the version that I'm looking at.
while he's pulling that up too, and then I want Billy to answer, and also I'm just curious, like the Sinai Bible, where was that
I
piece
found the
discovered?
text where I was referencing. Actually, I was misquoted. I misquoted there. It's the Gospel of Barnabas.
All right. So here we go again. The Gospel of Barnabas. Everybody knows that this is a forgery, that this is a fraud. The Gospel of Barnabas is not true. Everybody knows that. Anybody that does their homework knows that. Yet Billy quotes it. He quotes it and he relies on it. And every podcast, he talks about the Gospel of Barnabas, and people believe him. Are you kidding me? Come on, you guys can't really be believing this stuff that Billy talks about. I told you guys he's a fraudster and a huckster. Come on, guys. You can't really believe the Gospel of Barnabas is true. Come on, really? You really, come on. Seriously? Come on.
Answer, and also I'm just curious, like the Sinai Bible, where was that
I
piece
found
discovered?
the text where I was referencing. Actually, I was misquoted. I misquoted there. It's the Gospel of Barnabas.
Okay, yeah. Well, so that's good. So let's deal with that too, because I've actually worked with. There are two manuscripts of the Gospel of Barnabas. The Gospel of Barnabas is a really interesting document because it is a known forgery, and so that's why I think it's important to get to these sources. So, at the very start of the Gospel of Barnabas, which we only have two copies of, one is in Italian and one is in Spanish. We see right off the bat that the Gospel of Barnabas, not to be confused with either the Epistle of Barnabas or the Acts of Barnabas, which are two apocryphal documents from the 2nd century, but the Gospel of Barnabas in particular, we know it's a forgery because it does things like in chapter 92, it says that Jesus spent 40 days on Mount Sinai, and then he came to the Jordan River and he walked to Jerusalem. But Mount Sinai is more than a week's journey away from Jerusalem, and neither Mount Sinai nor Jerusalem are close to the Jordan River. So never mind there not being a route from the Jordan River to like around Mount Sinai or going to Jerusalem. But there are internal problems with the Gospel of Barnabas, which indicate that it shows no actual indication of evidence of coming from or even having knowledge of first century Jewish understanding. It actually says Jesus is the Christ, but not the Messiah, which indicates that whoever the author is, he didn't know that those were the same words. And I think a bigger problem is that the Gospel of Barnabas actually paraphrases Dante's Inferno, which was written in 1314. So there's a lot of internal evidences that disqualify the Gospel of Barnabas, never mind the fact that we don't have any evidence of it prior to the 14th century, and none in any other language other than Middle Age Italian Italian and Spanish. But the internal content of the Gospel of Barnabas disqualifies it from being ancient. And then the fact that it's doing things like paraphrasing Dante, or it also refers to a rule of the time of Jubilee, which was changed in the Middle Ages from what it was in the biblical year of Jubilee. And it goes with the Middle Ages concept, not the ancient concept. So I think what I'm getting at is, so I'm a historian, and I deal with sources. So when I'm looking at sources, I want to make sure that I have a methodology by which I approach any type of source. So if there is something that denies the crucifixion, I want to make sure that I'm analyzing it and that the methodology by which I analyze it actually reveals that the content can be accurately tied to the event. So if we're talking about, say, Codex Sinaiticus, that's in the 4th century. Now that is, I would agree with you, Billy, our oldest copy of the Bible in the sense of cover to cover, Genesis to Revelation copy of the Bible.
Right.
The problem is that we have individual copies of all 4 Gospels going back hundreds of years before Codex Sinaiticus. So I have a facsimile behind me of P66. This is a late 2nd century copy of the Gospel of John. I work with this particular manuscript. I can just show the screen right here. This is an almost complete copy of the Gospel of John. And it
Is that the
has the
papyro by
crucifixion.
any chance?
Yeah, so papyrus is just the what it's made out of.
It's the
So
the material it's on.
I got that from Chat GPT, by the way. Sorry, guys. I'm just trying to sound smart for a second.
I have that papyrus at home.
Oh, that's
so I'll show you this. So so the documents you actually see on my bookshelf behind me are facsimile papyri that I've made. So when I was in Egypt last summer, I went and I made for me some papyrus sheets. And so I take these papyrus sheets, which are made from the papyrus plant, and then when I go and I look at actual manuscripts,
So not only does Wes rip apart the Gospel of Barnabas and tell you about all the internal inaccuracies and inconsistencies in the book in the Gospel of Barnabas, he then calmly turns around and reaches and pulls out a piece of P66. People don't even know what P66 is. Billy just sits there and just bobs his head and says, well, you know, when it comes to the papyri, I have a copy of a copy of a copy. Did you guys catch that? I mean, this is, it's over. It's over. Let's continue.
the problem is that we have individual copies of all four Gospels going back hundreds of years before Codex Sinaiticus. So I have a facsimile behind me of P66. This is a late 2nd century copy of the Gospel of John. I work with this particular manuscript. I can just show the screen right here. This is an almost complete copy of the Gospel of John. And it
is that the
has the
papyri by any chance?
Yeah, so papyrus is just the what it's made out of.
So the material it's on.
I got that from Chat GPT, by the way. Sorry, guys. I'm just trying to sound smart for a second.
I have that papyrus at home.
Oh, that's
so I'll show you this. So the documents you actually see on my bookshelf behind me are facsimile papyri that I've made. So when I was in Egypt last summer, I went and I made for me some papyrus sheets. And so I take these papyrus sheets, which are made from the papyrus plant, and then when I go and I look at actual manuscripts, so I was at the University of Philadelphia last summer, and I went and I saw a document called Pt.1, which is a 3rd century fragment of the beginning of the Gospel of Matthew. And so what I did is I sat down with that original and I produced a facsimile. So I copied the text. First of all, I cut it out with an X-Acto knife in not the original 3rd century one on my papyrus. I cut out with an X-Acto knife this guy, and then I copied the text transcriptionally on the front and the back. So papyrus is just simply, it's what it's made out of.
Yeah.
And so there's categorizing systems, and the standard one is called the Gregory Alland categorizing system. And so sometimes you'll see when manuscripts are mentioned, they'll have a GA and then a number behind it. If it's made of papyrus, you simply abbreviate the word papyrus to P, and then you have the numbering system. So P66, what I showed you earlier, that's this on the categorizing system. It's the 66th manuscript that was put into the system. It's from the Gospel of John. I also have, P46 and P47 on my shelf, which includes all four Gospels and Acts from the 2nd and 3rd centuries. So the only hesitation I have with what you said, Billy, is that we have single copies of the Gospels that can be dated to the 2nd century that all do have the crucifixion. And so if we're relying on something like the Gospel of Barnabas, which is not just like, it's not that there's debate about it, it's that it's a known forgery. I mean, no one's referring to the Gospel of Barnabas as anything other than...
If you say it's a known forgery, yes, but I'm going to go with that.
Hold up. Time out for a second. Time out. You guys don't understand. Billy was just on an interview that came across my YouTube feed like a week ago, or less than a week ago, that has over 1 million views. And in that interview, he said the exact same thing on this lady's podcast. The Sinai Bible said that Jesus was never crucified. He, matter-of-factly spoke about the Gospel of Barnabas as if it was a factual book. And Wes just ripped through that idea and that theory. And Billy said, if you say that it's a forgery, then I will go with that. He didn't give any pushback. He didn't say, well, I disagree with you because of my travels and because of all my research. The Gospel of Barnabas is authentic. He did not say that. There was no pushback on the Gospel of Barnabas. There was no pushback on the Sinai Bible, which is really the Codex Sinaiticus. I don't think you guys understand what's going on here. Billy is being exposed. Now, Wes is a scholar, PhD level. Billy would never ever get on the stage with anybody like that again. I could almost guarantee it. Well, I can't guarantee it, but he would not get on the stage with somebody like that. He'd probably find some Christian off the street and thrash him to let his followers know that he still got it. But he would never face down a Christian that knows his stuff. Let's continue.
And so if we're relying on something like the Gospel of Barnabas, which is not just like, it's not that there's debate about it, it's that it's a known forgery. I mean, no one's referring to the Gospel of Barnabas as anything other than...
If you say it's a known forgery, but I'm going to go with that. Let's talk about the Old Testament a little bit and leading up into the New Testament.
Well, hold on, because do you mind if I address the Gospel of Jesus' wife?
Sure, go ahead.
What was her name?
Yeah,
I'm like trying to write notes like I know what I'm doing, but I'm just curious.
So the Gospel of Jesus' wife doesn't actually mention. So oftentimes what happens is that the text of the Gospel of Jesus' wife is kind of paralleled with the Gospel of Philip, which mentions that that Jesus would kiss Mary Magdalene on the mouth. And so those are kind of used in parallel to kind of for this argument that Jesus was married. So the Gospel of Jesus' wife is in the Harvard Library. However, the reason we know it's also not legitimate is because even though the manuscript, the papyrus that it's on, was carbon dated to the 4th century, the text was actually copied from a PDF version of the Gospel of Thomas known as Grandin's Interlinear. And there was a mistake in the Coptic text of Grandin's Interlinear that was copied into the Gospel of Jesus' wife. So we know that this is not a legitimate document, even though the papyrus is ancient, and this happens a lot with forgeries. I have a couple of friends who have actually worked on projects that have revealed forgeries within Dead Sea Scroll manuscripts and within other ancient Christian papyri. But the reason why we know the Gospel of Jesus' wife and that Karen King, who kind of vouched for it and she lost a lot of credibility, unfortunately, for her, and she's admitted that it's a fake as well, was because we can tie it directly to not copying from an ancient text, but actually copying from an online version of the Gospel of Thomas in a PDF form. And the mistake on that PDF form was copied into the text that was borrowed in the phraseology of Jesus' wife. So I just point that out is, once again, with our sourcing, I think we need to make sure that we're going towards not just early sources, but actually credible sources. And unfortunately, neither the Gospel of Barnabas nor the Gospel of Jesus' wife are credible sources in terms of actually, and agreed upon by not just the vast majority of scholarship, but I don't know anybody in the field of papyrology, paleography, historiography, who actually refers to these documents as being legitimate.
That's fair enough. I can respect that. So let's go into the Old Testament a little bit. Predominantly from my research, I discovered that a lot of information from the Enuma Elish and the 7 tablets of creation is a lot of in Genesis, a lot of the creation story that comes into Genesis. Not all of it, but because obviously Genesis is a much smaller version of a much bigger story. But it's literally almost word for word from the Enuma Elish and the 7 tablets of creation. The Epic of Atrahasis as well is also there in the Old Testament. Several other tablets as well, Code of Hammurabi and a few others have made it into that text. Sumerian cylinder scrolls that talk about the creation story. Again, the creation story in the Epic of Atrahasis. And so we tend to see this copying of ancient tablets, text, and scriptures, even some papyruses, into the biblical text. Meaning that my point here is that I think a lot of people are saying that this information was written in real time. A lot of people believe that. If you ask the average person, they really believe that. but a lot of this information is just copied from older tablets and texts from an earlier date. That's what I have found, that it's made it into the canonized Bible, but they never reference that they got it from any other ancient texts and tablets that have to do with a totally different civilization with totally different religious beliefs.
Have you read the Unravels?
Yeah, I've done lectures on it.
Sure. Do you mind summarizing the content of the creation account in the Unravels for us?
Sure. The Unravels is a very ancient text discovered in the Library of Ashurbanipal, and the summary of it is that it really gives us an account, which is crazy, an astronomical account of the creation of our solar system. It talks about planets and moons gaining specific orbits around the sun. It talks about a huge planet named Tiamat, 4 to 6 times larger than Earth. Earth didn't exist at the time that this, according to the author of this text, which is pretty interesting. And then there talks about a nemesis of sorts. In the original version, it's called Nibiru, but in a more recent version, still thousands of years old, the name was changed to Marduk. Marduk is in the Jewish American Library, in the biblical text, in the Torah, and so forth. Very popular figure in ancient times in the religious books and texts. Marduk wanted to be the destroyer, so Marduk is the one that during its next orbit towards Tiamat, crashed into Tiamat, destroyed Tiamat. A huge chunk of it swung away, recoalesced, taking the water, land, and organic material, which basically recoalesced as our planet here, Earth. And the rest of it broke up into pieces. Some of it turned into the asteroid belt. Other parts of it were thrown towards the sun, and some were thrown towards the inner Oort cloud, towards the outer edge of the solar system. This planet, or this moonlet that orbited supposedly a brown dwarf, based on the description of it, gained a very strange orbit around our sun. And we have the scientific evidence now also to match with NASA's data, where we see that Saturn and I believe Neptune switch places. Uranus is flipped on its side, and that's more evidence that something came through our solar system in ancient times and gravitationally really tugged at planets here and switched up their orbits and even pulled the axis of a planet on its own side, where the equator is now running north and south. So a little bit of modern astrophysics kind of backs up what this ancient text is saying. But the Enumilish also then begins to talk about the fact that these beings, it kind of cuts into the fact that these beings, are on Earth and at some point begin to engage mankind. In other words, they didn't create people from scratch, but they engaged the existing hominid and began to utilize us as workers for their workforce. In the Atrahasis epic, you see a much similar story, slightly later date period, but still thousands of years old, the epic of Atrahasis. And we see a very similar story. And we see where the sons of God literally came down to Earth. They came from Mars, according to this text, if you read the translation of the planet Mars and to English. And then they went to battle. They were going to go to battle in South Africa against Enki and Lil and Anu. And they come to terms without going to battle. They argued that they needed women, human women, believe it or not. And they also wanted a workforce. They didn't want to continue to do the labor. They were cleaning out the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, digging canals, building cities on Earth, and according to the text on Mars, not according to me. And a decision was made by Enki and Anu and Enlil to allow this experiment to happen, where they would take the existing hominid here. They would slay one of the gods, meaning that they would, in my opinion, that doesn't mean that they're going to kill it, but somehow some type of genetic modification or manipulation, in my personal opinion, that's my personal hypothesis. But in the end, it ends up being that human beings are now doing a lot of this labor and worshiping these people as gods, as they, my personal opinion, masqueraded as gods. A lot of stories there, parallel stories that you see in the Bible, even the Tower of Babel incident, and many other crazy stories that are in the Bible. You can find a lot of those true stories in the ancient text, like the Epic of Gilgamesh, where you can find the true story of Noah. They found the Noah tablet to give him instructions on how to build the ark. It wasn't a big boat. It was a round disc that he built with sections cut up on the inside like a pie. That was discovered about 4 or 5 years ago. I believe it's at the British Museum now. So there's a lot of text that's just been covered and copied over into the biblical text. And I think that, in my personal opinion, a lot of people are just became a cargo cult, worshiping people that were masquerading as gods. I do believe in God, by the way. Let me make this clear. I believe in God. I believe I believe in that there's a creator of the universe. I believe that the mathematics, the quantum physics, all proves that. The fact that we're here, I believe this universe is imbued with a divine energy and a divine spark that lives inside of all of us. I just don't believe that the God of the Bible is truly the creator of the universe. I don't think that God needs money. I don't think that God needs
Sure. Do you mind if I just jump in here for a second?
So Billy goes off on a tangent about the Bible creation story and begins talking about the Epic of Gilgamesh, which supposedly is a parallel to the flood story of Noah. And then he, really gets into the Enuma Elish, which is actually a creation story. It's an ancient text, creation story. They call it the Babylonian or the Chaldean or the Sumerian creation story of how everything begins. And he said that parallels the creation story from the book of Genesis, because Moses wrote the book of Genesis much later. But when you actually take a look at the Enuma Elish, there really are no parallels to the Bible. In the Bible, when you look at Genesis, it's very specific. On the first day, God created this, and it tells you what he created. On the second day, he created this, and it tells you everything that was created on those days. It also says, God said, let us make man in our image and in our likeness. That's not in the Enuma Elish as well. Mankind is not made in the image of God and his likeness. So Billy is like grasping at straws or whatever. But, Wes is going to ask him, show me some parallels. And Billy going to give him one parallel. His lies are unraveling right before his eyes. He's going to start pushing back in the second half of the interview. And so we're going to jump into that as well. Let's take a look.
I just don't believe that the God of the Bible is truly the creator of the universe. I don't think that God needs money. I don't think that God needs
sure. Do you mind if I just jump in here for a second? Because I think we've kind of gone on from the original question. I appreciate that. I do have a few issues with your summary, although I think I have read the Akkadian version. My Akkadian's not great, but I sat down with a Syriologist friend and we walked through it a couple of years ago. So I think that there are components of what you said that I would say are in there. I'm not sure it's the best summary. Nonetheless, okay, going with what you said that there were like verbatim parallels with the biblical creation story. Even just going off of what you said, which I think there are components of that I would agree with, the battle of the gods, the concept of Enki and the younger gods, and they fight Tiamat, and then Marduk, who swears he'll defeat Tiamat, and Kwenku, who kills Tiamat by shooting her with an arrow, and there's this big battle, and then the gods that die end up being the earth and the sky and even us, because we are the end result of that battle. I'm just curious, when you say that there are not just parallels, but there's actual copying, looking at Genesis chapter 1 and 2, where the creation story is summarized in the Bible, what are the actual kind of parallels there that you're looking to? Because as someone who's read both, I not only do I not find parallels, I actually, and this is the majority of ancient Near Eastern scholarship with me, think that Genesis chapter 1 is actually an apologetic against documents like the Enuma Elish. So what are the parallels there?
Separated the waters from the waters, for example. That's in the Enuma Elish, and that's also in the biblical text.
Okay, that's
and that was it. I was expecting more. Oh my gosh.
That I would agree is a parallel. The only reason I highlight that is that if you're making this the argument, because if you brought it up, and I mean this with all due respect, there are superficial parallels. I would agree. The separation of the water, the concept of the earth being formless and void. That's also in the Enuma Elish. However, I think all the other details, it it isn't the it's the details that make the difference. And if we're looking at not the superficial crossovers, but the actual themes and concepts of what it's saying, you don't have a creation within 7 days.
The Bible's not going to take the Enuma Elish and put it into the biblical text. There are certain words that they utilize that let me know that they copied it from that text. Like, for example,
so what words?
Separating the water from the waters, the void, the earth being void. That information is literally just copied over. So it tells you that somebody saw that and said, let me add it to this book right here, or let me add it to this scripture or this papyrus, because it wasn't a book yet at that time.
So was this text discovered that makes it parallel to Genesis? Was this like supposedly discovered prior to? I'm just curious.
It wasn't discovered prior to the Bible, but it dates back long before the Bible was ever written.
Yeah,
okay.
So let me just say this. So the reason why I say it's actually an apologetic against that is because the purpose of the Enuma Elish, which the Babylonians read every Babylonian New Year, was to point out the fact that the deities, and there's countless deities in the Babylonian pantheon, they actually come from the created order. So they're not outside of time and space. They actually come from the created order. And when they die in this battle, right, when Tiamat is defeated, the defeated gods become the earth and the sky and the plants and even you and me. And in that sense, the theme is that you don't actually have any purpose or end result, and you're not created in the image of God. In fact, in the ancient Babylonian system, only the kings were created in the image of God. And what we see that is counter to that is that even, sure, there's superficial, divided the waters, but we find that in almost every society and culture. That's not a parallel as much as it's just a generality. I would say what we see within the biblical account is that God purposefully creates. There's only one God. He purposefully creates, and then he creates, and it's good. And it continues to say it's good 7 times. And then at the end of chapter 1, just for, the thick people in the original audience, it says, and then it was very good. And then he creates humanity, not kings, but simply the humans that he creates in God's image. And they have purpose and meaning, and that instills them with this creation order. And that's not what we find in the Enuma Elish. In fact, we find the opposite in the Enuma Elish, is that the created order is not good. It's a mistake. And that you are not created in the image of God. And there's a reminder that regular people are not created in the image of God. So linguistically, Hebrew does have Semitic ties with Akkadian. Doesn't with Sumerian. Sumerian is a language isolate, a glutenizing language. But I would say, just with all due respect, the parallels linguistically are not there. There might be superficial kind of concepts that are there, but they're so superficial that we can find them in everything. In the sense of, I'm in my office studio, you're in your office studio. That doesn't mean that that we're the same people or we're even in the same place. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but I don't agree with that. I just see if I have all these texts out, there's a lot of different information that you can see. There's a lot of it's been copied word for word into the biblical text. But
what's the word for word?
In your version of what you believe in, you keep saying that God's a he.
Yeah.
And so where do you get that from?
Well, throughout both the Hebrew Old Testament and the Greek New Testament, you have the masculine singular pronoun used for God.
And why is God a man? Where's the evidence of this?
Well, God isn't a man. See, within historical Christianity, we don't believe that God has a gender. However, the way that he has decided to reveal himself is through the masculine plural, and then ultimately by becoming a human in the person of Jesus Christ. So we don't believe that God has a gender. In fact, the fact that God creates humanity in his image and he creates them male and female, those are 2 aspects of the image of God. And so that's the completeness. So historical Christianity has never argued that God is gendered. Jesus is gendered in the sense that during the incarnation, he becomes a human man, but he's still fully man and fully God. But God is spirit. And right, as the scripture says, we worship him in spirit and in truth. But nobody's arguing that. What's that? Sorry?
That always blows my mind.
God is the same all the time, right? He's always good. God is all the same all the time. right? Is that
Yeah, but we do see that in Scripture, God has revealed Himself through the masculine plural, and there are aspects of
that's
God's character
convenient?
that we see within Scripture that do actually communicate. Jesus says that He longs to gather Israel like a mother hen collects her chicks. So we see aspects of the feminine of God, not meaning that God is feminine, but that the image of God reflects both the masculine and the feminine, and that's why when the two become one flesh, there's a uniting of that reflects the image of God as well
Do you
within
believe
the
that the majority of
covenant of
Christians?
marriage.
Do you actually believe that the majority of Christians really believe that God is not masculine, that God is has both aspects? If you
I
ask
mean, it's
10
irrelevant what the
people, if you
majority
ask
of
10
Christians
people on the
believe.
road, how many would
Yeah.
tell you, that God's not a man? They've never been taught this.
Well, I was taught it growing up. I was taught it in when I was a child, when I went to seminary, when I went to Bible college. I was taught it in graduate school. I would say I would say a few things to that. I would say, in one sense, it's irrelevant what the majority of Christians believe, because what historical biblical Christianity articulates is what they should believe. There are Christians who run around saying all sorts of things that are not in conformity to biblical, historical, Orthodox Christianity.
You're absolutely.
And they shouldn't believe that because it's irrelevant. And so if one Christian believes something that is not in line with biblical Christianity, I mean, that's on them. So God is not gendered, but he does express through inspired scripture the masculine the masculine pronoun.
That's pretty convenient. I mean, for an all-knowing, all-loving God to understand that human beings were going to take that and abuse it to put their boot on the neck of women for eons. It's pretty interesting. Also,
So Billy pushes back, and what's happening now is Billy starts to weave in that Luciferian Masonic philosophy. Remember I talked to you guys about the checkerboard floor, white versus black, left versus right. I'm sorry, left, yeah, versus right, uh, yin versus yang, divine masculine, divine feminine. Remember the Baphomet figure. The Baphomet figure is a hermaphrodite figure or a transgendered figure. It had both female breasts but male genitalia. And what Billy is talking about is that they believe that God is a hermaphrodite figure or transgendered figure. And that's why he's like, God could be both a man and a woman. He's sounding like Ariana Grande on her song, God is a Woman. This is going to be it for part one. We're going to move over to part two, where Wes addresses Billy's statement. I will say this, please pray for Billy. His soul is in jeopardy. I hope he gives up this foolishness and returns back home to Christ. He's fallen. I have fallen. We all have fallen. We are all sinners, and we all need prayer. We all need to come to repentance. I'm glad this interview, our debate between Billy and Wes, is still civilized. No shouting, no personal accusations being slung across the room at each other. But Billy, he's getting toe up bad in this interview slash debate. Just my opinion, but we'll head to part two. All right. See you over there. God bless.